Next, we have Nicole and Shoshana. Nicole is a third-year student at Duke Law. She has worked in the Wrongful Convictions Clinic since last semester. After graduation, she will complete a legal fellowship with Bredhoff and Kaiser in D.C. before returning to North Carolina to clerk for Judge Albert Diaz on the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. Shoshana is also a third-year student at Duke Law. She began her work with the Duke Law Innocence Project in her first year and has worked in the Wrongful Convictions Clinic since last fall. After graduation, she will be joining the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office as an Assistant District Attorney. Let's welcome Nicole and Shoshana.
Thank you so much. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the Wrongful Convictions Clinic and our work there. But before we get started, I want to take a moment and ask everyone to think back to the spring of 1994. Just try to imagine where you were, what you were doing. Now, I can't speak for what you were doing, but a little jogging of the memory. President Clinton was our president then. A little show called Friends was about to start its first season. There were no iPhones, no Google. In fact, 1994 was the year that the internet as we know it today was born. I was about 18 months old. Nicole, well, she wasn't born yet. Now imagine that being the only world that you've known as a free person. And imagine being taken out of that world and then re-entering it today. Imagine everything that's changed in the world, everything that's changed in your life, and everything that's changed in your family's lives. That's the story of one of our clients, one of the clinic's clients, Dante Sharp. You can see over in the corner here. This is right after he was released after being incarcerated for more than a quarter of a century for a murder he didn't commit. He was arrested 2 weeks after his 18th birthday back in 1994. Now, that's Dante's story to tell, and you actually might have the opportunity to hear from him if you're in the Durham area, because he's now here in Durham working with both Duke and a wonderful local organization called Forward Justice. As he re-enters our society, he is dedicating his life to advocating for the change, to change the system that nearly took his life from him. But what we do want to talk about is our work with the clinic and what it looks like and what we have done and how it impacts our lives, especially as future prosecutors. And that begins with a discussion of the kind of work that we've done in the clinic with the families, and it's not just the traditional legal work that you see on television. It's a little bit of everything. It's a very holistic approach, and hopefully it all comes to moments like this with Dante or with Charles Ray Finch, who you can see with part of his team and his family after being released last year after 44 years of incarceration. And so, as we learn from these experiences, we're learning not just about who we are and who we want to be as lawyers, but how we can change that system moving forward in our careers as prosecutors.
When Shoshana and I started law school, we both had a drive towards doing public interest work, specifically with the government and with criminal prosecution in mind. Now, when we went into the classroom, we kind of quickly learned that criminal law itself, it's just very divorced from anything that you can get in a textbook. You know, you can learn the rules of evidence for purposes of going to trial. You can, if you want to do federal law, you can learn the statutes that federal prosecutors and defense attorneys actually used. But criminal law so uniquely affects people and individual lives and has such severe impacts on those lives. So as much as we can learn the tools that we want to use as lawyers to help people, law school in the kind of traditional sense doesn't necessarily give us an opportunity to see how those rules operate on the ground. Fortunately, clinic's been able to help us do that. You know, for example, when clinic helps us put these rules into practice at many different stages throughout litigation, we get to see how these things that we learn about in books actually kind of operate within a system. You know, for example, when we're sitting in a classroom, we learn a lot about constitutional rights, something that, a lot of us are familiar with in some regard. We learn about the substance of those rights, the cases that develop them, hear these great stories about these amazing lawyers who fought for justice. But when we put them into practice, all that knowledge only goes so far if there's all these procedural hurdles that are in place that prevent us from making those arguments for our clients in the first place. The clinic experience uniquely has given us the opportunity to learn about those blockages and hurdles and see how we can actually put these things that we're learning from books into practice in individual cases. In law school, you're consumed with that big picture. You learn how to make value judgments and understand the law in terms of how it affects everybody at once. But clinic has helped us come down from that and realize that the practice of law is about so much more than just those rules, and just really see how individual people and individual families are so deeply and intimately affected, like the family that's seen up there. And that really shows you that it's worthwhile, the work that we put into them.
And it is those stories that inspire us in work that can be incredibly frustrating and slow. But it is incredibly rewarding, and I want to give you a little bit of a snapshot of what it looks like in the clinic, and what even a clinic is actually. If you haven't gone to law school, you might not be familiar with the idea. It's essentially a pro bono law firm in law school, where students work with professors and staff to serve the community and to serve clients and to get real-world experience. And so our work has been everything from investigating claims, looking at potential defenses in cases, researching case law, writing briefs, everything that you would imagine, as well as going out and interviewing witnesses, going to crime scenes, and driving hours and hours to visit clients in prison. And the beginning of the semester is actually a great example of how the clinic functions and what our lives in it look like. Winter break wasn't actually even over for us. I was back home in Vermont, standing in line in a grocery store, when I got a text from Nicole saying, "Did you see the email about our most recent assignment? We've got a filing due in the Fourth Circuit in a couple of weeks." Fast forward a couple of days, I'm walking through the airport trying to get back to school. I'm on the phone with Nicole. We're talking about a string of case law, trying to figure out what it means, how it applies in our case. A few more days later, and we're huddled in the clinic office. The clinic office is a small room with a large table and a lot of chairs and no windows out to the outside world. So we don't know if it's daylight or night. And while most of our friends are enjoying a long day, we felt that it was appropriate what we were doing to observe MLK Day and that long weekend. We were trying to get this filing done. It was everything from researching the law, talking back and forth as much as possible to figure out, what does this mean? There's not necessarily a right answer. We're not sitting in a lecture hall with professors telling us the answers or trying to figure them out of books. We're trying to come up with it ourselves. Writing this document meant coming together in that room with students, with professors, with former clinic students who are now attorneys, dropping everything to get this done in time and to fight for a client who is still in prison. It is incredibly inspiring to have stories like Dante's and the other clients who have gotten out, but it's also inspiring to recognize just the scale of the problem, to see that as of 2018, more than 2,200 people have been exonerated. Those exonerees collectively have served 20,000 years in prison. 20,000 years. That's not counting the people who are still in prison today, not counting that client who we are still fighting for. It is a team effort, though. Law school is very hierarchical. You walk into your lecture hall, you have your professor lecturing at you, and here we come together as a group, and we're working together to figure it out and do everything that we can to actually have an impact in the real world. And again, we're learning at the same time, and we're learning about who we are and who we are as lawyers and as future prosecutors, and we're learning about a system that is deeply flawed and how we can change it moving forward.
I think I speak for both of us when we say that this experience has fundamentally altered our perspective and how we see the system that we want to operate both for and within. And it's been a very exciting time to be in the clinic right now because we're coming off of two recent wins in court. Both Dante and Charles Ray French, who is up on the board, together they served almost 70 years in prison for crimes they demonstrably did not commit. In fact, one judge in Dante's case, when new evidence came forward from the medical examiner who did not actually review certain evidence at the time, the judge in a legal document said that this new evidence completely eviscerated the state's entire theory of the case. There's simply no going back from that. So the clinic's been very energized in a lot of ways because we're coming off of these wins, and we've had a lot of events throughout this year that we've been so happy to be a part of, where we got to meet everybody's families and hear them speak. And really, there's nothing more humbling before entering this profession than hearing about a daughter who hasn't celebrated a birthday with her father or just celebrated her first birthday with her father in over 40 years, or a mother who has been fighting tooth and nail without faltering for her son for over 25, or from Dante himself, who, I don't know if you could tell in the picture that was up there a moment ago, but is not a small man, talking about how his little brothers that he remembered from when he went into prison were now even bigger than he was. So in that sort of experience, it really teaches us about our, technical ethical obligations, certainly as, aspiring prosecutors, but also just about the types of lawyers and people that we want to be. Because of how holistic our system is here, both in terms of the investigations that both the clinic and the Innocence Project does, but also in terms of the quality and scope of the litigation that we do both in state and federal court, we really see the perspectives from every aspect of this process. We're not the prosecutor preparing for trial or the defense attorney preparing for trial, trying to just look at what's out there. Instead, we get to take a step back and look at everything from the police department, from the trial prosecutors, from the trial defense attorneys, and depending on the stage of the case, potentially appellate lawyers in the Attorney General's office, as well as state and federal judges. And being able to look at it from that large of a standpoint, we can really see the points of the system, not just where, in many cases things go right, but in these cases in particular where things go wrong. And going in with that big picture perspective, as well as just with the motivations of the deeply human element from working with these people and their families, we know that we're going into a system where we can really seek to pursue justice and change.
Thank you.
Awesome. Any questions okay. Ryan, you got it?
Actually, I have two questions, quite different. My name is Adrienne Pardo. I'm a lawyer, but I did land use and nothing like what you're doing. So my first question is, how does the clinic decide which case to take on and which not? And then my second question was, how did you decide that you want to become a prosecutor versus a defense lawyer?
So, do you want to because you did Innocence Project, do you want to explain that?
Yeah, so I can't go into great detail about how the selection process happens because the students aren't involved in that necessarily. There's sort of a two-stage process, though. There is an Innocence Project, which you can become involved in as a 1L, and they basically investigate cases that have been brought to us. And I think a lot of the cases actually come from the North Carolina, I'm forgetting the name of the organization.
Innocence Commission.
Innocence Convention. And they basically recommend, I think, some cases to us. And the Innocence Project takes them, investigates them, and if it looks like there is a potential case, it gets moved to the clinic and the clinic begins work on it. As to the second question, I came in not entirely sure. I actually worked in a public defender's office my 1L summer, and I kind of got swept into the progressive prosecution movement. One of the main places that is occurring right now is in Philadelphia. And so I got recruited into that and went there last summer and decided to return there. So I was a little bit on the fence, but I knew going in, there's a lot of literature that's coming out about people talking about how prosecutors have a lot of the power in the courtroom and can really affect a lot of the change by using that power for good, hopefully.
My experience, I did some defense work in college with a defense lawyer in Columbia, South Carolina, and we had a couple cases actually that pushed me towards prosecution because it involved our clients were victims of chronic domestic violence. So my specific interest areas as an aspiring prosecutor are in special victims work, specifically domestic violence and sex crimes. So that's kind of what has kept me on that side. But in terms of what Shoshana was mentioning about these prosecutorial offices that are really taking initiative in this movement, like I mentioned kind of a little bit before in terms of there's so many, just innumerable procedural hurdles to get these cases reviewed in formal litigation. You know, sometimes judges might see that there's wrongdoing, but because of the legal standards that are in place via statutes, there's just not that much you can do. So much of what happens in the system is contingent on individual prosecutors' choices or committees within prosecutors' offices trying to do the right thing. And we see these conviction integrity units that are just springing up around the country. I know there's a new one in Jacksonville, Florida. Philadelphia is definitely one of the more famous ones right now in terms of progressive prosecution. And that can just make such a difference. So I think it's just the aspect of being in a position to make sure you're trying to do the right thing. It's humbling, and it's this sort of exposure really opens your eyes to what can happen in these cases, even if there's people who think they might be doing the right thing. So it's really just about being in that sort of position.
Okay, we can take one more question right now.
Have you seen Just Mercy, and what did you think?
I'm actually probably going to see it. I believe there's a panel tomorrow that Dante is actually speaking on. There's going to be a viewing of it. So I haven't seen it yet. I've read the book. I'm very excited. I've heard really Dante loved it. So I think that's a big thumbs up.
Yeah, the clinic coordinated a bit of a showing, I think, for next week. So hopefully going to go. I've been saving it. Yeah. But it's great to, see those stories coming out now and really raising popular attention to the problem.
All right. Thank you both so much. This was super.